I never imagined that moving into Lakeside Vista Estates would turn into a battleground where my combat-injured brother would be discriminated against by our HOA president. But when my mother, State Senator Claire Mitchell, discovered what was happening, she unleashed a legislative storm that would change HOA laws across the entire state. After 12 years of apartment living, saving every dollar from my job as a physical therapist, I finally had enough for a down payment on a beautiful townhome in Lakeside Vista Estates. The community had everything: walking trails around a pristine lake, a state-of-the-art fitness center, and a resort-style pool with accessibility features. This last amenity was particularly important because my younger brother, Marcus, a Marine veteran who lost his right leg in Afghanistan, would be staying with me while completing his intensive rehabilitation program at the nearby Veterans Medical Center. The day we moved in was perfect. Clear blue skies as Marcus and I carried boxes into our new home. Well, I carried most of them while he navigated with his prosthetic leg and forearm crutches, insisting on doing his share despite my protests. "Rebecca, I didn't survive a roadside bomb to be defeated by cardboard boxes," he joked, his determined smile reminding me of the little brother who always pushed himself before the war changed everything. Our first week was blissful. Marcus particularly enjoyed the therapeutic pool, which helped ease the chronic pain in his residual limb. The water's buoyancy gave him freedom of movement that he couldn't experience on land. I'd watch him swim laps, his face peaceful for the first time since returning home. On Saturday morning, as Marcus was preparing for his swim therapy session, the doorbell rang. Outside stood a woman with a perfectly coiffed silver bob, wearing a crisp white pantsuit despite the summer humidity. A pearl necklace gleamed at her throat, and she clutched a leather portfolio embossed with the gold letters HOA. "Good morning," she said with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Victoria Hamilton, president of the Lakeside Vista Estates Homeowners Association. I like to personally welcome new residents." I invited her in, grateful for the gesture, though something about her calculating gaze as she surveyed our living room made me uneasy. "You have a lovely home," Victoria commented, making notes in her portfolio. "I see you've already installed a ramp at the side entrance. You should know that any exterior modifications require prior HOA approval." Before I could explain about Marcus's needs, he emerged from his bedroom in swim shorts and a t-shirt, his prosthetic visible below his shorts, crutches under his arms. Victoria's expression shifted subtly. "And you are?" "Marcus Mitchell." My brother extended his hand. "I'm staying with my sister while I complete my rehab program." "I see." Victoria's tone cooled noticeably. "Ms. Mitchell, our bylaws are quite clear about long-term guests. Anyone staying more than 2 weeks must be registered with the HOA and approved." "He's my brother," I explained, "and he's a combat veteran recovering from injuries. The pool therapy is essential for his rehabilitation." Victoria's gaze flicked to Marcus's prosthetic leg. "About that. The community pool is for residents in good standing and their short-term guests. Long-term arrangements require special approval and additional fees. Also, we have rules about equipment in the pool area, for hygiene and safety reasons." Marcus stiffened beside me. "Equipment? You mean my prosthetic leg? I remove it before entering the water." "Nevertheless," Victoria continued, opening her portfolio, "Section 12.3 of our bylaws states that the board can restrict facility use based on safety concerns. Additionally, the therapeutic use of community facilities for ongoing medical treatment is prohibited without special variance." She slid a form across our coffee table. "You'll need to apply for a special accommodation, which the board will review at our next quarterly meeting. Until then, I'm afraid your brother cannot use the pool or fitness center." I stared at the form, dated 3 months in the future, but his rehabilitation program is now. He needs the water therapy daily. Victoria smiled thinly. Rules are rules, Ms. Mitchell. Lakeside Vista maintains its premium property values because we enforce our standards consistently. No exceptions. As she turned to leave, she added, "Oh, and that ramp will need to be removed until properly approved. You'll find the 27-page application for exterior modifications in your welcome packet. The Architectural Review Committee meets bi-monthly." After she left, Marcus sank onto the couch, his face tight with the expression I recognized from when he was fighting through pain, but trying not to show it. "Becca, I don't want to cause trouble. Maybe I should just stay at the VA dormitory." "Absolutely not," I said, my hands shaking with anger as I read through the Byzantine requirements Victoria had left. "This is your home too, and what she's saying can't possibly be legal. This is discrimination." "Unfortunately, I've seen it before," Marcus sighed. "People see the uniform, they call us heroes, but the moment we need actual accommodation, we become inconvenient." That night I couldn't sleep. The excitement of our new home had been poisoned by Victoria's visit. I spent hours researching disability rights and HOA regulations, but the complex legal language left me frustrated and uncertain. I hesitated to involve our mother. Senator Claire Mitchell was in the middle of a crucial legislative session, and she carried enough burdens without adding our problems. But when I called Marcus's VA counselor the next day and described the situation, his advice was unequivocal. "This is a clear violation of fair housing laws," he said firmly. "Your brother has rights, and that HOA president is counting on you." Not knowing them or being too intimidated to fight. Call your mother. This is exactly the kind of situation where having someone who understands the law matters. Little did I know that this call would not only resolve our situation, but would ultimately transform HOA regulations for thousands of disabled veterans across our entire state. I called my mother the next morning, expecting her usual calm, measured response. Instead, when I explained Victoria Hamilton's visit and the restrictions placed on Marcus, I heard a sharp intake of breath, followed by a cold silence that anyone who knew Senator Claire Mitchell recognized as the calm before the storm. "Email me those bylaws and all the paperwork she gave you," she said finally. "Don't sign anything. I'll have my legislative aide review it today." Meanwhile, Marcus insisted on following the rules despite my protests. "I didn't survive 3 tours by making unnecessary enemies, Becca," he said, setting up a physical therapy routine in our small backyard instead. I watched from the kitchen window as he grimaced through exercises that would have been nearly painless in water. 3 days later, we received a notice taped to our door. "Violation. Unauthorized exercise equipment in visible backyard area, section 8.4.2, prohibits fitness equipment visible from any common area. Fine, 100 days until removed." The unauthorized equipment was Marcus's therapy resistance bands hanging from our patio cover. That afternoon, while Marcus was at his VA appointment, I decided to introduce myself to our neighbors. The couple next door, the Patels, were warm and welcoming until I mentioned Victoria Hamilton. "Be careful," Mrs. Patel whispered, glancing toward the street as if Victoria might materialize. "Last year, our son came home from college with a service dog for his PTSD. Even with proper documentation, Victoria made our lives miserable. Citations for pet waste when there was none. Noise complaints when the dog was silent." "What happened?" I asked. "We couldn't afford to fight. He moved back to campus housing. This pattern repeated with nearly every neighbor I spoke with. The retired colonel across the street who couldn't get approval for a wheelchair ramp for his aging mother. The family 3 doors down whose child with autism was banned from the community center after a meltdown. Each story ended the same way. People gave up and either complied or moved away. When I returned home, another notice awaited. Violation, improper vehicle storage. Section 10.1 prohibits parking of oversized or specialized vehicles in driveways. The specialized vehicle was Marcus's adapted car with hand controls. That evening I spotted Victoria photographing our house from the street. When she saw me watching, she didn't even pretend to be doing anything else, just documenting the continuing violations. She called out pleasantly, as if commenting on the weather. The board takes rule enforcement very seriously. The next day, Marcus tried using the clubhouse gym during quiet hours. He returned home 20 minutes later, his face flushed with humiliation. The manager said, "My crutches could damage the equipment," he explained quietly. When I offered to use just the upper body machines without them, he said my situation made other residents uncomfortable. I was furious, but Marcus just looked tired. "It's not worth fighting, Becca. I've got enough battles." That night, Mom called. Her voice had the focused intensity that had made her a formidable prosecutor before entering politics. "Rebecca, this goes beyond your situation," she explained. "My office has discovered 17 complaints against Lakeside Vista Estates in the past 2 years, all involving reasonable accommodations for disabilities. 16 were dropped after the complainants moved away or gave up." "What about the 17th?" I asked. "A lawsuit that was settled quietly with a non-disclosure agreement." My aide convinced the plaintiff's attorney to speak off the record. "Victoria Hamilton has been systematically pushing out residents with disabilities because they impact property values and increase insurance premiums." I felt sick. That's illegal, right? Blatantly. But she's clever. She uses technical violations of Byzantine rules to make life unbearable while maintaining plausible deniability about her real motives. 2 days later, we received a certified letter. The HOA was initiating proceedings to place a lien on my property for accumulated fines now totaling $950. Attached was a printout of photographs, Marcus's resistance bands, his adapted car, even pictures through our windows showing his mobility equipment in our living room, labeled "improper storage of medical equipment in visible areas." "They've been spying on us," I whispered, horrified by the invasion of privacy. That afternoon, I met Kelly Zhang, the one neighbor who had mentioned fighting back. She had successfully forced the HOA to allow her daughter's wheelchair ramp 2 years earlier. "Victoria has systematic methods," Kelly explained in our hushed conversation at a coffee shop miles from Lakeside Vista. "First, she identifies undesirables, usually people with disabilities, large families, or anyone who might use community resources heavily. Then come the violations, followed by fines, then threats of liens. Most people can't afford the legal fight." Kelly slid a folder across the table. "I've been documenting everything, not just our case, but everyone I know who's been targeted. I always hoped someone with resources would help us fight back." Inside were dozens of testimonials, photographs, and documented patterns of selective enforcement. One image made me gasp. Victoria, at a private HOA board dinner, caught mid-speech on someone's phone camera. "Property values depend on attracting the right kind of residents. Certain elements simply don't fit our community aesthetic." This isn't just about bylaws, I realized. This is systematic discrimination disguised as rule enforcement. When I showed the evidence to Marcus, his military training kicked in. "This is now an intelligence operation," he said, his voice steady for the first time in days. "We need more documentation, recorded interactions if possible, and a clear pattern of behavior." By afternoon, our situation had escalated dramatically. Our key fobs to community amenities stopped working. A notice appeared informing us of an emergency board meeting to discuss our violations. Someone had placed flyers on neighbors' doors. warning about problem residents endangering property values. But Victoria had underestimated us. While she was rallying her board against us, we were building our case methodically, with my mother's full support. Kelly Zhang organized a secret meeting of affected residents in her basement. 12 families attended, each with similar stories of discrimination disguised as rule enforcement. Using my legal background and Marcus's military planning skills, we developed a coordinated strategy. That evening I received a call from my mother. "It's worse than we thought," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Victoria Hamilton sits on the State Realtor Association's Legislative Committee. She's been actively fighting against my proposed bill to strengthen disability protections in housing for the past 3 sessions. This is personal for her. She believes accessibility requirements devalue exclusive communities." "So what do we do?" I asked. "Spring the trap," Mom replied. "Attend that emergency board meeting. Record everything. I'm bringing reinforcements." The emergency meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. in the clubhouse. Marcus and I arrived early, accompanied by Kelly Zhang and 3 other residents with disabilities who had been targeted. Victoria's face betrayed momentary shock at seeing us together before she composed herself. "This meeting is for board members only," she announced, gesturing to security guards positioned at the entrance. "According to HOA bylaws section 3.2, Marcus spoke up, any meeting where punitive actions against specific residents are discussed must be open to those residents with 48 hours notice." He smiled thinly. "We received notice 52 hours ago." Victoria reluctantly allowed us to sit at the back while the board assembled at their table. 7 members, all in business attire, with Victoria at the center. The meeting began with a rehearsed discussion of our numerous violations, complete with a PowerPoint presentation of our non-compliant property modifications. When Victoria opened discussion of potential penalties, including possible eviction procedures, the clubhouse doors opened. My mother entered, flanked by 2 attorneys and a man I recognized as the State Attorney General. "I hope we're not interrupting," Senator Claire Mitchell said pleasantly. "I believe this qualifies as an open meeting regarding housing regulations, which falls under my committee's oversight." Victoria visibly paled. "Senator Mitchell, this is a private association matter involving documented violations of state and federal housing discrimination laws," Mom finished for her. "My office has received 17 sworn complaints from Lakeside Vista residents. The evidence suggests a pattern of targeting homeowners with disabilities for selective enforcement." The Attorney General stepped forward. "Ms. Hamilton, we're serving you with formal notice of a state investigation into discriminatory housing practices." He handed her an official envelope. "Additionally, the court has granted an emergency injunction halting all enforcement actions against residents with disabilities pending our investigation." Victoria stood up, trembling with fury. "This is an outrageous overreach of government authority into private association matters." "No," my mother replied calmly. "This is what happens when those entrusted with community governance abuse their power to discriminate against the very heroes who defended our freedoms." The board members exchanged nervous glances, and one whispered urgently to Victoria, who silenced him with a glare. "This meeting is adjourned," Victoria announced. "Our attorneys will contact yours, Senator." As Victoria gathered her papers, a silver-haired board member approached us. "I had no idea," he said quietly. "The selective enforcement was always presented as standard procedure. I'm a veteran myself. Vietnam. I never would have supported this if I'd understood what was happening." Looking at his shocked face, I realized many board members had been manipulated as thoroughly as residents. Victoria's systematic discrimination had been hidden behind bureaucratic language and selective information. The next morning, Victoria herself provided the opportunity. She rang our doorbell at 7:30 a.m., a new violation notice in hand for improper garden plantings, where Marcus had installed a small raised bed he could tend from his wheelchair on good days. This time, I was ready. "Before you say anything," I interrupted as she launched into her rehearsed speech, "I'd like to record this conversation to ensure I understand the requirements correctly." Victoria's smile faltered momentarily, but she quickly recovered. Of course," she said smoothly. "Lakeside Vista has nothing to hide. We simply enforce our rules equally for everyone." What she said next, captured perfectly on my phone, would become Exhibit A in what my mother was already calling the case that will change housing discrimination enforcement forever. "I appreciate your cooperation, Ms. Hamilton," I said, holding my phone visibly as the recording continued. "Could you explain exactly why my brother's raised garden bed violates HOA regulations?" Victoria straightened her already impeccable posture. "Section 14.7 clearly prohibits non-standard landscaping elements. The architectural aesthetic of Lakeside Vista must be maintained." "But the Jensen family has 3 raised beds in their backyard," I countered, showing her photos I'd taken during my neighborhood investigation. Her smile tightened. "Their installation was properly approved through channels. When I checked with the Architectural Committee Secretary, there's no record of that approval," I said. "It seems some residents receive automatic approvals while others face obstacles. Why is that?" Victoria's eyes narrowed. "The board has discretionary authority to determine which elements enhance or detract from community standards. And how exactly does a disabled veterans therapy garden detract from community standards?" Victoria's mask slipped momentarily. "Your brother's condition and all his equipment create an impression of infirmity that makes prospective buyers uncomfortable. Studies show visible disabilities lower property values by up to 17%. My hand trembled with anger, but I maintained my composure. "So you're openly admitting to discriminating against residents with disabilities?" Realizing her error, Victoria backpedaled. "That's not what I meant. We simply have standards, which apparently include keeping disabled veterans from using facilities they have every right to access," I finished for her. Victoria's voice hardened. "Your attitude is precisely the problem, Ms. Mitchell. Your brother's need for special accommodations places burdens on the entire community. The pool must be kept at specific temperatures, equipment must be stored, liability insurance increases. These costs affect everyone." "Actually," came a deep voice from behind me, "the Americans with Disabilities Act and Fair Housing Act make it illegal to deny reasonable accommodations." Marcus wheeled himself to the doorway, having opted for his wheelchair today due to pain in his residual limb. In his lap lay a thick folder. "Staff Sergeant Marcus Mitchell, Marine Corps," he introduced himself formally. "I've taken the liberty of reviewing federal accessibility laws as they apply to homeowners associations. Would you care to see my findings?" Victoria's face flushed. "This conversation is over. Your violations stand, and the fines will continue to accrue." She turned to leave. "Before you go," I called after her, "I should mention that I've sent this recording to my mother, Senator Claire Mitchell. She sits on the State Housing Committee and is particularly interested in your comment about disabled people lowering property values." Victoria froze mid-step, but quickly recovered. "Attempting to intimidate an HOA official is grounds for additional sanctions. Expect to hear from our attorney." As her car pulled away, Marcus and I exchanged glances. "That went better than expected," he said with grim satisfaction. "We definitely rattled her." The following morning, our driveway was blocked by landscaping equipment. The crew foreman apologetically explained they'd been ordered by the HOA to perform emergency aesthetic remediation on our property at our expense. I called the police, who reluctantly informed us it was a civil matter. However, one officer quietly suggested I contact the County Disability Rights Commission immediately. As we left the clubhouse, neighbors had gathered outside, drawn by the presence of official vehicles. The story of what had happened spread rapidly through the crowd. For the first time since moving to Lakeside Vista, I felt a sense of community, forming, not the artificial aesthetic Victoria had cultivated, but something authentic, built on the shared experience of finally standing up to intimidation. What none of us realized was how far Victoria would go to maintain her control, or that by morning the situation would escalate from discrimination to potential criminal charges. I awoke at 5:30 a.m. to frantic pounding on our front door. Kelly Zhang stood outside, breathless and panic-stricken. "They're destroying the evidence," she gasped. "Victoria called an emergency document shredding service. The company van is behind the clubhouse right now." I threw on clothes while calling my mother, who immediately contacted the Attorney General. Within 20 minutes, Marcus and I joined a gathering crowd, watching an extraordinary scene unfold. State investigators were intercepting boxes being carried from the HOA office to a commercial shredding truck, while Victoria Hamilton, still in silk pajamas beneath a hastily donned blazer, argued vehemently with officials. "Those are private HOA documents. You have no right to seize them," she shouted as an investigator catalogued each box. "This is a legally executed warrant based on credible evidence of document destruction related to an ongoing discrimination investigation," the lead investigator responded calmly. "Interfering constitutes obstruction of justice." A murmur ran through the growing crowd of residents as the HOA secretary emerged from the office, her face ashen. "Victoria told me it was routine document disposal," she stammered to investigators. "I didn't know it was illegal." By afternoon, the story had exploded. Local news vans lined our street, and my mother held an impromptu press conference on the community lawn. What began as one family's fight against discrimination has uncovered what appears to be systematic civil rights violations, Senator Mitchell stated, with Marcus and me flanking her. Today, the State Attorney General's office seized documents showing potential discrimination against disabled residents, veterans, and minority families, all hidden behind a facade of rule enforcement. The evidence recovered from Victoria's attempted document purge was damning. Investigators discovered coded notations on housing applications. Category D for disabled, Category M for military, Category FC for families with children. Properties with these designations faced triple the violation notices of other homes. Most shocking was a confidential board-eyes-only strategic plan outlining Victoria's vision for Lakeside Vista. Phase out Category D MFC occupants through escalating compliance requirements. Target 90% premium demographic composition by Q4. The morning after the seizure, we received an unexpected visitor. Howard Foster, the HOA treasurer, looked years older than he had at the emergency meeting. "I had no idea," he confessed, sinking onto our couch. Victoria compartmentalized information. The financial reports showed increased compliance revenues, but never where they came from. She claimed the documentation restrictions were to protect privacy. Howard had brought his personal copies of HOA financial records, revealing another disturbing pattern. Collected fines didn't go into general maintenance as residents believed, but into a community enhancement fund that had paid for luxury upgrades to properties in Victoria's neighborhood section, properties owned by board members and their friends. "It wasn't just discrimination," Howard explained, his voice breaking. "It was financial self-dealing. 3 days later, the full board, except Victoria, voted to cooperate with investigators. She was suspended from her position pending the investigation, and all fines against residents with disability accommodations were cancelled." Marcus received a hand-delivered letter of apology, along with key cards for all facilities. That weekend, Residents organized an impromptu community gathering at the pool, watching Marcus swim pain-free for the first time in weeks, exchanging stories with 3 other veterans who lived in Lakeside Vista but had previously been too intimidated to use the facilities. I felt a bittersweet satisfaction. An elderly man with a walker approached us. "I've lived here 5 years," he said, "and this is the first time I've used the pool. Victoria told me my walker would damage the deck." The investigation expanded beyond discrimination as financial irregularities surfaced. Victoria had apparently been running Lakeside Vista as her personal fiefdom, using selective enforcement to push out undesirables while diverting funds to benefit her inner circle. My mother called an emergency session of the State Housing Committee, where we testified alongside dozens of other residents from HOAs across the state with similar stories. "This isn't an isolated incident," Mom explained during her committee address. "We've uncovered a pattern of discrimination hiding behind HOA authority across multiple communities. The lack of oversight has created fiefdoms where basic civil rights are routinely violated." The committee fast-tracked legislation that had been stalled for years, Senate Bill 1142, the Fair Housing and HOA Accountability Act, which established state oversight of homeowners associations, mandated transparency, created an appeals process for residents, and imposed severe penalties for discrimination. As we left the hearing, a reporter asked me if I felt vindicated. "This was never just about my family," I replied. "It's about ensuring that those who served our country, those with disabilities, and anyone who doesn't fit someone's narrow definition of desirable can live with dignity in the communities they choose." 10 days after the document seizure, Victoria Hamilton was formally charged with multiple counts of housing discrimination, obstruction of justice, and financial fraud. Released on bail, she held a defiant press conference, maintaining her innocence and portraying herself as a victim of government overreach. Few were convinced. Former board members distanced themselves, revealing how Victoria had manipulated information and intimidated anyone who questioned her methods. 3 former residents filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of everyone who had been forced to move due to discriminatory practices. At Lakeside Vista, an interim board was elected, including Kelly Jang and Howard Foster, who had become unexpected allies in reform. Their first official act was to commission an accessibility audit and create a Veterans Affairs Committee, which they asked Marcus to chair. "We want to make this right," Kelly told him. "Your expertise could help ensure no one faces what you experienced." Marcus, who had initially just wanted to complete his rehabilitation in peace, found a new purpose in advocacy. The military precision he brought to documenting violations was now channeled into creating a model policy for disability accommodation. 1 month after our confrontation with Victoria, the Attorney General held a press conference announcing a statewide investigation into discriminatory practices by homeowners associations. Lakeside Vista was just the beginning. Investigators had received over 200 complaints from residents in 40 different communities. My mother's legislation passed with overwhelming bipartisan support, giving it immediate effect as an emergency measure. The Mitchell Act, as it became known, established the nation's strongest protections against HOA discrimination. Walking through Lakeside Vista that evening, I noticed something that brought tears to my eyes. On nearly every porch sat residents who had previously been invisible: elderly neighbors with walkers, veterans with service dogs, children with visible disabilities, all enjoying their community without fear for the first time. Victoria Hamilton's reign of discrimination had ended, but the journey toward true community had only just begun.